that has hurt us. Because when you look at the other people that we deal with and how unified they are doing themselves a tremendous favor. And we always want to know why we don't have a seat at the table. We don't have a seat at the table because they don't know who to ask to be on the table, because we've got 9,000 different things going on as strength coaches. And I'm a supporter to all the associations that have gone, that have been here and have splintered off and developed into very, very significant, impactful organizations for strength and conditioning. But in the whole, if we can't unify our own selves and have one voice and one command of what's going on, we can't get upset at the other individuals and the other groups who are getting a say, because they stay unified, they stay organized, regardless if there's issues, they band together. I've seen it at the professional level, and I've talked to several people, and not just football. We have to do a better job of understanding what we are and who we are. Too many people are determining what our roles are, and those people are not strength and conditioning coaches. I'm not going to go much more in depth in specifics because it's an event that has a lot of people out there, and I've got to be very politically aware of that, because coaching is a unique deal and you just never know the actions that can be taken. But what I'm trying to tell you is we have some very strong people that are on this call that are with the CSCCA. We have very strong people that are on this call that are at the NHSCCA. We have some people on this call that would consider themselves NSCA people. The truth is, we got to be strength coach people. And when we figure that out, and when we can get the higher ups of each of those associations to truly understand that we're hurting ourselves, I'm not asking everybody to that, and I do understand why. But we have to have some type of unified executive membership board that consolidates all three of those memberships, so that when it is time, we can elect one official to go out there and represent us in a manner that can make us look like we actually are a professional field instead of just a job choice or a career. I think that's the number one thing off the top of my head, is finding a way to bring some type of unity to a group that's been splintered for many reasons. The longer you've been in it, the more reasons you have. The younger generation, they're just following their mentors. There shouldn't be as much upheaval about what association you're with and what you're affiliated with. I'm affiliated to strength coaches. I could care less what association you're in. If you're a strength coach, I want to help you. And that's what we have to understand. If we want to help each other, we have to all look at that way. It isn't, I'm this or that, or I'm this or I'm that, or I'm doing this or she's doing that. It can't be that way. We're losing. I'm telling you, we are losing. So we've got to figure it out for ourselves. We all talk about how we know what we know and how we can do this and how we can change that. Well, there's a lot of great people who are in those roles for those organizations that need to understand that we've got to band together and figure out how we do that. The other things is, from a professional standpoint, is, again, we have to do a better job of understanding what's going on within the realm of social media, self-branding, and self-promotion. I think this era has changed dramatically the look of what can be done from the strength and conditioning profession. We have to be aware that for every quality amount of information that's out there, there's the so-called coach promoting a specific method or a specific exercise. And then when you peel the layers back of their onion, you find there's no sustainability. But yet, because they've done a good job with the self-help promotion marketing videos, and you can get on YouTube and learn how to look professional, they're winning over certain people in our profession, the younger era athlete, as well as the younger level coach. Those of us who want to say we are leaders and mentors, have to bring that to the forefront when we're with our interns and our younger strength coaches that are under our tutelage. There's too much information out there that's terrific for us, that's getting washed away by people who can do a better job of promoting their stuff on social media, and we're losing the battle of credibility. And I'm not talking about we have to be published in journals with 100 review of literature references. I'm talking about true practicality, that when, Kevin Yoxall, John Patrick, Eric Klein, Carlo Alvarez, Craig Sowers post something, I know the layers of that onion. I'll read that. But if I see somebody trying to tell me how to coach a professional team and has never coached in the team setting, I have a hard time of looking at that as any type of broach. Don't tell me what I can do until you've done it yourself. You're speculating. Everybody thinks they can do it better than someone else, but yet they're not willing to take the time to throw themselves in the hat and see if they can do it. I can speak to pretty much probably anybody on this call who works in a team setting that you've read from somebody who said, well, if I was in the team setting and I was training that team, I'd do this. Well, in the private setting, and I've been in the private setting, if I wasn't in the team setting, I would probably train some of these guys a lot different than I would in the team setting because of the time available. Everybody wants to talk about, well, you're not doing this. You're not doing that. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. Hey, I got 6 hours, fellas, in a 5-day work week. Let me see how much of this we go down to these private facilities and they're doing, a 45-minute hurdle warm-up. 45 minutes, that's 1/6 of the hours I got to work with a guy during the week. I've got to be a lot more efficient than that. So there's things that we've got to understand. I don't think, I know that the young generation, because I talk to a lot of them, that we're not doing a good enough job of teaching them how to understand the process of learning. It's a regurgitation world. It's whoever's the fly-by-night run, who's got the hot hand right now. Let's follow them. Let's do what they're doing. But yet then the next hot hand comes and that young strength coach just drops everything they were doing with the other strength coach and moves on. And again, it all comes back to sustainability. I'm definitely not here tonight to pump up my program, but the reason why we've been successful in the programming that I've written for 10-year-olds up into a Super Bowl contending team was it was sustainable. We didn't when all these new fads came through, we just stayed the course and tried to absorb, modify, and apply all those things and see how it fits. Too many people just say, well, that didn't work. You didn't give it time to work. You didn't give it time to prove to yourself, to your coaches, and to your athletes that there's sustainable success if you believe in long-term athletic development. But there's also that tremendous of capabilities of knowing how to be a great programmer and absorbing a lot of that content that is out there and a lot of the things that are different than what you do and finding ways to fit. It's not always going to fit. You have to be willing to say no. I mean, the toughest thing about coaching professional athletes, especially the high motivated ones, is they always consistently want to add more to their training plan, but they don't understand there's only so many gallons in a 20-gallon tank, AKA 20 gallons. When you're trying to do 22 gallons of work, it doesn't work. And you have to be able to tell them, okay, you want to do all this extra, what are you pulling out? What do you mean? I can't pull nothing out. So you can only do so much before things go bad and your body breaks down. And that's part of the education and the learning. The younger strength coaches are just adding. And that's the problem, because the practicality of our programming and the practicality of our profession is not being understood by these people. And that's where people like ourselves that are on tonight need to do a much better job of saying they want to help the profession. Then you have to step to the plate and help the profession. And that is teaching those before you and respecting the history of those who teaching those behind you and respecting the history of the people that come above you, before you. That's another sticking point in our profession. The younger generation has no clue of the history. They have no clue of why we are able to do what we do and how we do it. And this is a point of emphasis that I'll be speaking at a couple of times. Every young strength coach should read The Golden Years of Strength and Conditioning that Coach Yox was in, and that was edited by one of my favorite coaches of all time, Chip Sigmund. Though you read those anecdotal stories, that'll give you a perspective of where this thing started and where it is today. Because some of those stories, that's kind of when I was getting into it, and a little bit before. That's the real life world of what these people need to know. They walk in now into strength and conditioning programs that have 12, 15 full-time strength coaches, 5 just for football. When I first interviewed with Coach Yox in 1991, he was the head guy and I would have been his only guy. Me and him, 20-something sports. I go to Boise State, it's me and Ron Thompson, 17 sports. And back then you were a GA paid, but you got to call yourself the assistant because that was the only staff you had. Now they got 5 assistants just for football. I'm like, golly, man, I don't even understand that. Like, I can't even understand what 5 people can do just working football during the day. It baffles me. And the game has changed, right? What can strength and conditioning professional do to improve ourselves? You take that 4th and 5th assistant who are really glorified GAs. Let's face it, most of them are glorified GAs if they're just breaking into the program. You walk them over to the Olympic strength coach and you tell them, put these dudes to work because they got to learn how to coach. They got to learn how to program. They got to learn how to interact with head coaches. And they've got to learn what it's like to coach other athletes outside of their specialty. We're doing the strength and conditioning what we do to a lot of things in the United States. We're doing it backwards. Got kids graduating college being sport-specific strength coaches, but yet everybody on this Zoom call will tell you, well, I love multi-sport athletes. They're so diverse and they've got all this athleticism and all this athletic ability. Well, think about all you guys who've been in it in my era or below or before. How diverse are you because you had to coach 17 sports? And how much better did that make you when you picked the one sport that you wanted to specialize in, whether it be football, baseball, basketball, women's basketball, women's volleyball? It doesn't matter. You are a much better coach because of those experiences. And that's another thing that we've lost. And a lot of it's not our fault. It's the evolution of the athletic department. It's the evolution of the salaries of head coaches being able to dictate what they want to achieve success. And those athletic directors are going to do that. You're paying that kind of money and that individual says, I need this person to be by my side. That's going to happen. So the age of a sport-specific strength and conditioning coach is here and probably going to be here for a long time. But that doesn't mean that we can't get a hold of our younger coaches and walk them to and get them more opportunities to learn what it means to be a coach. And that's why I would say anybody in a mentoring phase, I highly recommend that coaches that are starting off in this profession, regardless of what they know their long-term goal is I would highly recommend them doing their first GA and or full-time job in an Olympic sport or a multi-sport setting, because when it's time for you to specialize, 1, gives you more job opportunities when things go bad. And 2, when it's time to specialize, you'll be more than ready to handle the dynamics of training and programming for a single sport based off those experiences. So that's my thoughts on the profession. I could go a little bit longer, but I think you've gotten the gist of where I'm coming from. We have to unify. And I don't mean that in the way of like consolidation. We have to come up with a way that we can at least be considerate of one another, understand that there's been differences in the past, but if we don't get over that and we don't get to a point where we can have one person representing us all entirely, sitting at that table and knowing that all of our interests are in at the best capable hands of an individual who understands the dynamics of what we do and how we do it, we will have a chance to win some of the battles that we lose. Be a mentor. You have to be a strong mentor. Believe in your convictions, but remember, this is the most diverse thing. People always ask me about strength and conditioning for athletes and the programming. There is no right program to strength train athletes. Look at how many people have been successful at the variance of programming. That's the great thing about training athletes, man. It's the most adaptable person to train. It's not like training a weightlifter or a powerlifter, or a strongman, a bodybuilder, a professional CrossFitter. Those are very specific strength disciplines. To train an athlete to pull from all these dynamics and try to figure out how to mold the clay is the most greatest thing that we have by training team sports. So those are things that we've got to be able to and be willing to say and be humbled when you need to be humbled, and also be aware of the facts that there's so much more out there for you to learn that you're never going to be able to be perfect. How was that, Yox? Is that all right? Okay, next, what are your breakdown drills and progressions for linear speed? Now, why would you ask a strength coach about linear speed? But I will tell you this, I don't care what level you're at. I don't believe in fancy when it comes to running straight ahead. I think there's some specific mechanic drills that are necessary, but I will even go even to a more beginning phase than that, where I start off right away with just lunging progressions and mobility work. I'm a huge believer in forward and reverse lunging, walking lunging, as a primer to anything that I do with younger athletes trying to build a linear speed program. I'm a huge proponent of backwards running. It's been a successful drill for me. I think there's a lot of cool things from a mechanic standpoint that help when you move forward. I don't have any empirical evidence. I just know that from watching 30 years of guys running and women running and then timing 40s and 10 meters, that there's some merit in the mechanics of that when we go on to frontline linear speed. The most important thing is when we talk linear speed, generally people want to talk about timing. So then the start is critical. I will take no credit for what we taught the start. In the early 2000s, I purchased a book on 40-yard dash training that Martin Rooney and I believe Joe DeFranco wrote. I think it was co-written. And they were at the time, one of the premier combine prep programs. And that, to me, that book alone was written in such a coaching manner that didn't go over the top with the technical aspects and the terminology of a pure sprint coach would, of a Dan Poff or Tom Tellez or individuals like that who could really kind of scare you when they talk about speed development. So I thought that from a strength coach perspective, that book really helped when it came to the specifics of developing 40-yard dash speed for a football player, which can relate to any athlete because the acceleration phase, top speed and things like that were very beneficial. I also always would tell you to meet with the track coach. A great track coach is always a supporter of the strength conditioning program, and they are very aware of the type of athletes that you are training with, and they can give you some very subtle drills and some simple coaching cues to help you perfect that. I will tell you this, I always love how I watch guys find their way in strength and conditioning and how some people just really find that niche, that one unique role. And I would tell you, a coach, if you really want to know about building a linear speed program for athletes that are not necessarily track athletes, I highly recommend you reaching out to Coach Jeff Connors. Jeff Connors is by far, in my opinion, the best strength and conditioning coach that knows linear speed like a track coach. And his application process is all the things he learned from the track and field coaches that he spent many hours with. How he related it back to doing those drills with specifically football players or non-track athletes, by far his knowledge is as superior of any other strength coach I've ever heard talk on speed development. One of my favorite drills, once we've gotten through the dynamic warm-up, that I thought I had a tremendous amount of success with, per the question, is flying runs. I know if you follow social media, Donnell Boucher at the Citadel right now has been posting some of his variants of flying runs, but that's one of the simplest drills I ever learned. It might have been one of the first drills I ever saw when I started my career as a strength and conditioning coach, was the flying 30s with a 10-yard buildup and then a 30-yard sprint. And then as you get older, you start manipulating the sprint intervals so that you could work on different parts of the top end speed. So I think any type of flying run is a very good drill. The specific running drills, I would tell you to talk to a specific running coach. I did not get into the seated arm action drills that a lot of people did. I wasn't big into the wall sprints where you're bracing yourselves into the wall and you're doing some 3-step, 5-step, 7-step pop. I call them pops. And I'll be quite honest with you if you ask me why, because I didn't have the time to do it. I needed to run guys. And I was going to do more flying runs, resistive runs, and things that were going to teach them how to run in a linear fashion. And one of the things we would do on the flying runs and some of our acceleration type runs is instead of running from goal line to goal line, so to speak, if you're on a turf field, we ran sideline to sideline so the athletes could watch and we could watch patterns to see if they were maintaining a linear line. So they'd have to run with the white line or the yard line splitting the midline of their body so we could find ways to make. If guys have imbalances, they tend to shift and don't even know that. And one way that helped us as we were learning how to assess athletes' movements was to allow them to run down the yard lines rather than down the middle of the field. It just gave us a visual perception on where to look. And we would do things like, I know the high school fields are different than the pro fields and the college fields, but we would do things like build up to the number, burst to the second hash, and then decelerate down to the sideline. So we use the number and the hash marks as our acceleration and deceleration zone, so you can build up some different types of sprint distances. And then we would open it up where we build up to the number and full sprint to the far number. So it's different ways you can manipulate things by using a football field or field turf in your indoor center. We did the standard, high knee runs, skips. I like skips. I like power skips. I call them marching skips or power skips, where we're really talking about short burst, exploding the ball of the foot through the ground. Our cue was like cracking the concrete. We always talked about, we want to hear snare drum runners versus bass drum runners. If you understand that analogy, is a snare drum is pop, 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 pop. That means that ground contact time is limited, rather than a bass drum runner, which would probably be me, where it would go boom, 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 boom. Then we know we've got to work on some of the things with that athlete to get them turning over and being more explosive through each stride. I'm a big believer in the early ages that strength is imperative to speed. I know some people like to try to say there's certain things. I think as you get older, we're learning, especially if you follow my buddy Matt Ray, he's really finding some interesting body weight ratios now with the squat that are a little bit less than what some people believe them to be for high impact sprinting. One thing, I was lucky enough to be with Matt from about 2002 is when we first started working together at ASU. I trust that guy. He is a exercise scientist with a PhD with a lot of practical background. So I would hold his information in high regard. This is a guy who's practicing in a athletic weight room daily with some of the best athletes in college athletics, period. And he's collecting some real relative data to us as coaches. So I think that's somebody else. I have no problem recommending other people I have no problem making sure that you know where this information comes from. So the very dynamics of sprinting are very, very unique. I've always been lucky that I've had somebody on my staff that was a little bit more exposed to that specific unique development when it comes to the athletic-based plan of developing athletes. So I know enough to get you there, but then the experts got to take you to the next level. I know what I'm an expert at, so I'm going to stick to my expertise and then find experts to help me out. I have two of the same questions, and both of the guys have the same last name, and I thought they were trying to play tricks on me, but I think they're at two different schools. But this was for different programming for high school level athletes dealing with multiple sports and time restraints. And then the one was the multiple sport athletes always in the season. The first thing I'm going to say, and I learned this a long time ago, and some of you guys that are on the call will probably remember, when the Journal of Strength and Conditioning actually wrote articles that were practical, and there was no, like I said, there was no letters of reference. You didn't need to, you wrote about what was going on in life as a strength and conditioning coach. And one of the articles that really hit me, and it really taught me about what I was, because I'm allegedly a multi-sport athlete or a two-sport athlete in college, high school. I wrestled and I played football. But I will not lie to you. I wrestled because I was told it would help me play football. I was not a very good wrestler. And as I was learning, I don't know if I was studying for the CSCS at the time, but I was going through a bunch of old articles from the NSCA original journals. And the one thing that resonated me on an article on multi-sport athletes that I want to get out there right away for you coaches who deal with them is the difference between an AA multiple sport athlete and an AB multi-sport athlete. And what I mean is AB sport is second sport they're not too concerned about. They're utilizing it as activity, but really for preparation to excel in sport A. The AA athlete is exceptional at all sport, if that makes sense. So I think there's two different ways to program for that. If you have athletes who have one distinct level of sport, that this is their sport, like that kid's going to school on a basketball scholarship, they just happen to play volleyball and track just to keep them in shape and have some fun before they get to basketball, then you can train them totally different. Like you can push the training of during volleyball season and track and field season a little bit different, because in the end, the ultimate goal for that athlete is the basketball season. So that kind of helps you, because now you're not in that volume range and that percentage and load range that you would be if the athlete was a true multi-sport, excel, could get a scholarship offer in any sport they go to. Now, that is the tough part, because generally they're going to have very little time for that, what we would probably call maximal strength and power development phases, because they turn it over for a long period of in-season. The positive, though, is, and again, this is how I trained a lot of athletes in season as I learned more, and what we recommended is you can maintain a certain level of power if you utilize the dynamic effort method during all the in-season training for your lower body and your total body movements. And by manipulating the squat, so to speak, with some variations of accommodating resistance, you can get some maximal level of strength effects with the top end load, if that makes sense to you guys who utilize accommodating resistance with chains and bands. I can only speak from personal experience with accommodating resistance with a football team, but when we were at Arizona State, we were fortunate that we were successful enough that we would play in some bowl games. And our entire in-season squat program was based off of 3 to 4 week waves with three chains aside. So regardless of the athlete's squat max, They utilize approximately 120 pounds of total chain. You know, some might have been dangling, but to make the example right, it's 120 pounds of chain. So we could maximize the top end of these lifts by utilizing that top load percentage of load compared to their max. And we did this the same thing in the NFL, where we might be using 40 or 50% loads at the bottom to generate that explosive intent and that dynamic intent coming out of the bottom. But at the finish, those loads could be over 90%. And because of that, we could elicit a dynamic effort response and get some maximal effort movement at the top. And I can tell you, the year we went to the Super Bowl, we had several starters, one being Luke Kuechly, that because we used a combination of band, tension, and chain for the NFL guys, those guys had over 100% of their front squat max at the top end. Now, at the high school level, a little bit different, right? It's going to be very much determined by how well they're trained, how well their exercise technique has been taught to do what I would consider more an advanced level type of intent training for that age bracket of athlete. But you can still do straight weight dynamic effort, and then during an off week, maybe you press them to a certain percentage of load over 85% to see if they're maintaining a decent level of strength. The upper body stuff I've never really concerned myself with. We always weighed regardless of the teams. We always pushed anything into the low 90s every 3 or 4 weeks. We would vary some exercises. Generally, probably at the high school level, you'd stick with the same exercise, but every 1 to 4 weeks, every 4 weeks, we'd push 90%. And I always felt like from a confidence level, athlete level, they always wanted to feel fresh legs, but they always wanted to feel strong. So the best way to do that is, regardless if it was male or female, is let them see that they can maintain a good level of upper body strength, and then show them that by the lightened and dynamic method that you're still maintaining speed and power in the lower body. So that was always my intent when we did in-season work, was to go ahead and press the upper body into the 90 percentile range if we could, and then keep the lower body and total body movements very, very light and explosive as we could. The dynamic intent was critical. At times during the year, we would change that up a little bit, and if we could press the high end based off the amount of chain or bands we had, we would do that. I think that's extremely important. Then as soon as the athlete gets the chance to go to the off season, you give them a quick little recovery, and then you have to maximize those weeks for the multi-sport athlete. It's a very, very interesting dynamic that the higher levels you go, you don't have to worry about it as much. And it's funny how the developmental athletes are doing the most of the sporting expertise as they get older. You know, we all say they get specific, but the younger the athlete and the more diverse they are, the more they're exposed to anyway. And sometimes you also got to remember, depending on what type of sports they're in, some of those capabilities we've talked about are already being developed in practice, especially when you look at gymnastics, for example. There's no need to do dynamic effort and plyometric-based activity in the weight room when that's their entire practice. So you would probably focus more on upper body retention or progressive retention, and as much isolative type of medley work for protection of the different injury points of their bodies. So those are the ways you got to look at things. If you're a sprinter, if you're a sprinter in track and you're a high-level football player, you can easily, be more aggressive upper body than you can lower body, and then you have to find ways to manipulate the loads based off of the track seasons or what events. It's interesting how certain sports and certain coaches, regardless of the level, go ahead and manipulate training loads in the weight room based off of events. Especially you see it in track and field, where there's sometimes I've heard coaches say the indoor season is just a way for us to compete. We're not worried about winning a championship. Train them as hard as you want. I've seen that. I've even heard that with some swimmers. So it's a very unique process, because you think you're living in the in season very long, but if you find out that these athletes are only participating because they like it and the value is more from the team and it's not to be successful as far as getting a scholarship, then you can train them. That's communication. That's things that you can ask in your individual meetings with them. It's a very, the one thing that I learned in the NFL that I don't think we really do enough of at the younger ages is really communicate and ask these athletes questions. I think we think because they're younger, there's certain things obviously they won't be able to answer, but they can easily answer to you, okay, how important is this to you? Well, coach, I'm doing this because I was told basketball will get my footwork better for football. So you're not really worried about if you come off the bench or not. Nope, great. That's what I needed to know. So practice for you in basketball is your SAQ. You know what I'm saying? Speed, agility, and quickness work. And we're just going to train you right through the weight room. They can answer those questions for you. And if you have built a relationship with them, they'll be open to you. You're not their sporting coach. That's the one great thing sometimes about being a strength coach. You'll get some quality information because they don't see you as a threat by being their specific sport coach or assistant coach for what position they play. So the communication at all levels has to be very, very pinpoint and be very, very specific questions that you ask. If they want to excel, then you've got to adapt loads. You've got to look at the different movements. The one thing I will say too, with in-season talk about on edge in-season training is if you're dealing with one specific group, I've found that you can manipulate the loads, and I don't know how many people do it or how many people invest the time. And it's 100% based on playing time. 100%. If a kid's not playing, practice, that's conditioning, right? That's the same thing we just said. That's speed, agility, quickness. That program should look, you're a scout team player, you're a red shirt, that program is going to look almost identical to what I'm going to do in a winter or summer. The only thing that's not going to happen is we're not going to run unless it's a freshman Friday. But if you do something crazy like that, you might get fired in this day and age. So you got to be aware of that. So that would be someone always asked me how I would train a high school football program. And I'm going to be very, very blunt when I say this. This would be how I would set it up. All freshmen would stay together unless I had an elite freshman player who could start on varsity. If that freshman could not start on varsity, the whole freshman class stays together. I could care less if my JV team wins a game. My JV program is for participation. It's for those athletes who cannot get playing time on the varsity, but we still want them to develop because there is some things about different levels of puberty at that age bracket. So we still need to get them playing time. But my best players are not going to play JV. That 9th grade team, if I've got 5 guys that could be the superstars of JV, they're playing varsity. I'm in it to win state titles at the varsity level. So the JV program is like your scout team program. You can train them a lot different. Your freshman program is what I would call an intensive block 0 because they've already been with me all summer and probably, hopefully, the spring semester of their 8th grade year. So they've already gone through what I would consider the relative strength gymnastics phases of my programming. And now during that summer, we'll start introducing them to exercise technique for external loading. But that 9th grade group is going to stick together that entire year unless there's that one kid who can start for me as a freshman. and they're going to learn to bond, and they're going to be a brotherhood. JV program, all the best guys are going to varsity. Everybody will practice as a varsity, and then on the game day for JV, I'll just pick those guys who will be on the JV squad, and they'll go get their playing time. The varsity guys, those guys are going to train to win games on Friday night. So that program's going to look very much like any level of in-season programming. That would be the way that I would do it. And then from there, if you have the time and the staff, I would manipulate the varsity based off of playing time also, versus starters, versus non-starters, versus high volume special teamers. But as a high school, and I've coached 2 years of high school, so I can speak to it. What I learned watching how we did it, and that was a long time ago, if I were ever to get in front of a high school coach that was stepping into his first head coaching job, and they were just looking for different advices of structure and organization of the program from the incoming freshman through the graduating senior, that would be my recommendation. Because I think, although I said I'm not worried about wins and losses in the JV, that JV playing time is you are going to find the diamond in the roughs in the JV playing time. Just remember that. Again, coaching athletes and coaching my own sons, puberty is a funny thing, male and females. Some start early, some start late. You can't let that determine. Nothing matters until puberty hits. And that's why you always see that 8th grade, 9th grade kid that everybody thinks the next guy, by the time they're a senior, not so much. So we've got to be very aware of that when we're dealing with all our athletes, male and female. I love watching some of the pictures that I get sent of different athletes of the same age and their body type differences, and you can tell why one is excelling at that age over the others. And then if you follow and track and the others reach puberty and they start to catch up, the whole dynamics of the competition changes. So I think from finding the edges within season and working with the multi-sport athletes, it goes back to, are you a lazy coach? Or are you willing to accept the challenge that's out there for you and building a robust program that has the variability to attack the different modes of what the athlete is actually experiencing, whether it be a one-sport athlete at a different type of level of play, starter, second teamer, JV, freshman, or it's the AA athlete where you've really got to be creative because every sport matters to them. They have such a high level of competitiveness and athleticism in their sport that they need really unique, specialized looking work throughout the year. Or is it the ABC athlete where two of the sports they're doing are really irrelevant based off of their one goal is that they are scholarship related or some type of starter on the one sport using the other sports as a secondary assist. Block zero implementation and progression. So block zero, if you're unaware, is my term for introducing organized strength and conditioning work to athletes. It was really developed so that, let me backtrack. As early as the mid-90s, I knew we as strength and conditioning coaches were missing the boat. It was not our fault. It was just the way we were evolving at the time. Most every program that I had studied during the time I was at Boise State was a one program for all. There was not necessarily a freshman program, a sophomore program, a senior program, a junior program. You entered the strength program and everybody trained very similar. There's nothing wrong with that, except that some of the kids coming in weren't prepared. And what I learned over time was some of the things that we asked freshmen, they were incapable of doing. And what we were seeing was younger athletes losing confidence, getting disconnected, getting flustered, annoyed. Why aren't we making progress? Why am I getting banged up and ticky-tacked hurt? Because they weren't prepared. But like anything else, you have to have the wherewithal, the confidence in yourself to earn the respect of the coaches that you're working with, to understand when is the right time for you to finally say enough's enough. And again, I really started to have these thoughts and more specifically around 1996, my third year as a head strength coach. But I didn't implement a freshman-based orientation program until 2002 at Arizona State, because I finally felt like I had a credibility behind my name. I had worked with enough coaches to know that what I was doing had sound training modalities. And I had enough confidence to finally walk into a coach's office and say, okay, this is how it's going down. And they had the belief and the trust in me that, hey, this is how you think we need to get these guys right, then this is what we're going to do. So we developed a program based off of incoming freshmen who had never trained with us. So 0 is a training age with you of 0. That doesn't mean they hadn't trained, but they hadn't trained with us. And I learned a lot too with this by training both my sons and helping them, actually helping me as guinea pigs develop a plan of attack, what this program would look like. And the biggest reason why I believed I needed to create a Block 0 program for that level athlete was, and again, it has grown 100%, the talent of the high school strength and conditioning coach. But at that time, there wasn't specific coaches, that spent all their time in the weight room. It was more sport coaches who would get the extra stipend for opening the weight room and having guys lift. And the last thing I wanted with the bastardized technique that's was being allowed at a lot of high schools was my kids were going to be so technically savvy that no matter what that coach allowed, they wouldn't be able to do it that bad. They would not have any bad habits. And that's the great thing about starting with these athletes before they touch a weight. You can create only solid, competent training habits. The toughest thing to do is to get an athlete who has a tremendous amount of hours in a weight room and they're not technically competent, to break them out of those habits. I won't speak for those who worked in the professional levels that are on, but the one thing that I noticed as a professional strength coach was it was very easy to find out what was allowed and what was not allowed in college weight rooms across the country when the rookies came in and trained. You knew who quarter squatted. You knew who let guys' butts fly off the bench on benching. You knew by the way a guy spotted if they spot or assisted a bench. You knew what type of clean technique was being allowed, all within the first week. And what you learn is as you rebuild these athletes, this is the interesting part about training the high-level athletes. As you rebuild these athletes, because there's a reason why they're in the NFL. There's a reason why they're in Major League Baseball. There's a reason why they've made the NBA. They can figure things out fast, super fast. What might take you 3 months to teach a high school kid or 4 weeks to teach a college kid, if you have the understanding and the communication abilities with a professional athlete, they can figure something out in like 2 or 3 sets. That's how well they can relate to things. That's the first thing I noticed. My first week in the NFL weight room, I was like, this teaching is going to be a lot easier than I ever have seen. But what you find out is as you rebuild these athletes technically, when the loading starts to change and the strain becomes greater, they will resonate back to the technique that they utilize to do those types of loading in their past experiences with that load. So an example would be if I'm teaching a squat and we're trying to get to top of the thigh parallel, would be a pretty good substantial depth for us in the NFL and what I used at college. And guys can hit that pretty well and be pretty successful between 70 and 85%. But then you start pushing that number and now it starts to get challenging. They're going to go back to the depth that they were used to handling those types of loads. You can have that guy keep his butt locked on the bench until it's time that, 405. And it's like, where did this come from? Because it's always going to resonate to what they were capable of doing earlier in their experiences under that load. It's very, very hard to get them to break those habits. That's why a lot of the times I stayed within certain ranges to get more quality and efficient lifting rather than go into what I call corrosive lifting technique. So those are things that we have to understand why block zero and those types of mechanics are important. If you can't maintain a quality body weight squat, it will be hard to maintain a properly executed squat with any type of external load. And the more efficient that we can become with a body weight squat, and again, I talked about quarter squat depth versus, if that's what you test, that's what you test. I'm not here to debate things. I'm just telling you, you learn what the dynamics of the protocols of these athletes were from college by watching them under duress. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that compared to what you're looking for, you'll see that. Block zero, when you get athletes through a block zero program and they've come systematically through a long progression of movement, body weight structured, especially through body weight and gymnastic strength. Pound for pound, you read it all the time. I just read it again somewhere, and a lot of you guys follow a lot of the same things I do, where Joe DeFranco had a lot of practical research with chin-ups and sprint speed. Relative strength, I would emphasize that more when we're developing these athletes. I think I talk about a toolbox, right? Everybody has their toolbox. I think what's being negligible at the high school level is these coaches are getting to be so aware of all the excess tools that are out there that they're exploiting the high school athlete with what I call advanced level tools. Well, these kids are gonna peak out physically earlier than those who are systematically brought up through a long-term processing of development. The ultimate goal is for them not to finish and max out athletically in 12th grade. Your ultimate goal is to continue to have them develop. So through 4 years of college, the college strength coach can build that for 4 more years, and hopefully talent-wise, regardless of the athlete, if there's a professional level of play for that athlete, they may get a shot. What I see a lot of times now is some of these guys are getting exposed to so many things at an early age. Well, the toolbox has already been exposed. I understand people want to expose people to different intents. I do. But you can't expose somebody to dynamic effort lifting if their squat and bench technique is horrible. Don't tell me you're doing negative, I'm just saying experiences. Don't tell me you're doing the triphasic programming, you're doing the maxi-centric cycle, and you're doing I don't know the specific percentages, you're doing an 80% negative, but when they're lowering it, their knees are crumbling. And then they're turning it into a good morning at the end. The merit of what you're trying to accomplish by doing the maximally centric cycle has no bearing, because you're getting no transferable traits out of it when the technique is corrosive. So why not spend quality time teaching them how to squat properly, and the transferable traits will exceed anything that you're doing by exposing a toolbox that the athlete's not prepared for. That is the concepts of block zero. What are the progressions? It's going to be based off of your clientele. A large public schools block zero program is probably going to look a lot different than an all boys private school. You're going to have a whole different type of person that you're dealing with. You're going to have to learn different teaching skills. You're going to have to learn different communication skills. You're going to have to, there's a difference between the discipline of lining up correctly. So all of that stuff is components that have nothing to even do with training. It's just about the ability to teach people how to follow directives, which goes on in life. And then once they've gone and you've taught them the basic components, the things that happen when they actually go to external load, it's going to make your life a lot easier. I always say this is why you look at from a developmental process. I think a lot of you coaches would agree. Here should be your ultimate goal, depending on what level you coach. If you're a high school coach, you want that kid to walk into a college if they're able, and that college strength coach go, who coached you? Tell him I said thanks or give me his number. If you're a college coach, you want that pro coach to say the same thing. Hey, who's your coach? And most of the time you would know them if you're in the pros because you probably have come up through that way. But hey, you got it going on. And then if you're a pro coach, the ultimate is taking what you have and putting that athlete in a planned, programmed, communicative, cohesive program that extends their career as long as humanly possible. And at any one of those points in time, it has nothing to do with you, the coach. It has everything to do with what are you doing right for your athletes. The lower levels, you want to do right by them, slow cook them. College level, 5-year developmental plan. Know all the things you want to accomplish, all those bells and whistles that you want to accomplish in training, save it for the end. Save it for that last hurrah, the money years, right? Like the senior years are the money years. Or if they're good enough and they're juniors and you know they're coming out, know what their money year is and graduate them through a training process that goes through that. Block zero is the start of a process. Process for most of us, because most of us are going to have kids for 4 years. So you look at it like an Olympic year. I look at it like an Olympic quadrennial. I look at it like year 1, I'm building a base, but year 4 is my money year. I'm going for my gold medal, which for a lot of those kids is a scholarship. If you look at it that process, and then you stand up and look at, okay, where do I want to be able to coach this kid? If you believe in accommodating resistance, velocity, using the tendos, man, I would love for these guys to be so proficient that when they were done, we could do this type of training. Okay, so then what does that look like counting back 4 years? What do you think they need to be able to accomplish year 1, then year 2, then year 3? Again, why are we exposing athletes to dynamic effort methods when they still haven't increased the ability of their absolute or maximal strength to have the ability to perform a dynamic effort method? These are challenges. These are the same challenges I've asked myself time and time again. This isn't anything that I'm telling you like, you're doing it wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm just giving you one person's humble opinion. I reserve the right to be wrong because I've already said there's so many different ways to do it. But I think sometimes as coaches, we look at what we're doing from what we want and not what's necessarily right for the people we're developing. Well, I want to be able to tell everybody I use velocity-based training and we're using catapult in high school. Okay, and where is that getting us? Because here's the truth, and this is something I'm putting in my life lessons of a strength coach. The truth is this: if you choose to be a strength coach for a team sport, none of your numbers mean anything. The only thing at the end of the day that matters is what the kid's record is. That's how you're getting evaluated. If you don't think that, then you're in the wrong job. Go to the private sector. And I've been in the private sector, so I can say that out loud. If you are not willing to accept that the number one criteria that we're being evaluated on is the success and failure of the team that you're working with, You're in the wrong business. You're in the wrong business. You can't say, well, I did my job. Well, if that team is 3-10, and you think your job was to have every kid bench 300, then you're part of the problem too. And that's a fact. People are afraid to talk about the facts. That's a fact of what we've chose to do. In the private sector, that's how you enhance your clientele, by producing numbers and individual statistics. Totally different. It's a totally different ballgame. I was there. That's like it's very different how quick you flip the switch too. Oh, I don't have to worry about wins and losses. Oh yeah, let's get this kid stronger as we can. Get him running. You know, what you're really doing, and I shouldn't say this, but I think there's some really good private sector coaches out there that understand the process, but you're being evaluated on their athletic performance indicators. In the private sector, you're being evaluated by their parents and themselves on their KPIs. As a team sport coach, you're being evaluated on what that record is. So that I should explain myself better. So it's two different dynamics. Individual statistics are a huge evaluator in the private sector. The team record is a huge evaluator in the team sector. And that doesn't mean that I don't want you to be successful when you're on the football field with your team, but I'm not getting evaluated that way. I'm getting evaluated by you and your parents by, hey, got your 40 better, got your vert better, got your squat better, got your clean better, got your long jump better. You killed it at the Nike Combine. You got a 100.72 Spark score. You're the best ever. But on the team, nobody cares if you got 40 guys bench 400 and your team went 2-11. And you can't look at it like, well, I did my job. No, you didn't. There's something missing. You're missing the disconnect. You service athlete to prepare them to be the best they can be at their sport. First and foremost. I won't go into my record board dilemma, because I used to have record boards and then they kind of all dissolved, because we realized that the only record that matters is Saturday afternoon in college and Friday night most of the time in high school football, and what that basketball team did and what that volleyball athlete did. The ultimate goal for you is, have you prepared that volleyball athlete to win the 5th set? That's the ultimate goal if you coach volleyball. Have you prepared that women or men's tennis player to win the 5th set? Not how much they benched, not how much they cleaned, not how much they dumbbell snatched. Did you prepare them to win the 5th set? Did you protect them? Did you give them the capabilities in their programming that they can feel confident that their body is prepared to go 5 sets? And that if you play a contact sport, that their body is going to be protected by the fact that you've improved the durability and the resiliency of their body armor. These matter. And that doesn't have anything to do with the number of a bench press squat or a clean or a vertical jump or a long jump or a 40 time. That is the key component. That's how Block Zero has fathomed into creation, is what do I need to do for my athletes to give them the best successes they can have in their sport. And if they happen to lift a lot of weights, then it's a bonus for me. But in the end, my goal is to figure out a way for them to have constant improvement over the duration of the plan that I have. I think there's a few guys that are on here. I think I don't see if my thing's going probably. I think there's a couple of women coaches that are in that era too that I saw on the list. Oh, now I lost my train of thought. So I'll chat pop up. I'll pop up. Hold on, let me get this chat and I'll go back to that. When going to a new school or team or school, would you start all the athletes on Block Zero? Yes. Just like I would tell you why, is because you want to get a general framework of what you're working with. And the best way to do that at a high school is to just put them all in the line, and you'll figure out right away which ones you need to work, which ones you may be able to move, especially, well, let me backtrack. First, do an assessment. Find out who the coach was before you, what type of program they ran, if there's any video of the kids lifting, so you can get an idea of value of the techniques that were being used. Then I would start everybody on block 0 because they probably have not done a lot of relative strength work anyway. I worked with, during football camps in the summer and during sport camps during the summer, we always did like iso lunge holds and wall sits and even just basic things like that. And you find out how many guys, or how, especially in the football camps, how many so-called 500 and 600 pound squatters can't do an iso lunge. You sure you squat 600? Or couldn't hold a body weight squat at top of the thigh parallel for 30 seconds. So you'll learn a lot from some basic little iso holds. I would say yes. Now in college, I will tell you this, and this is specifically for football, when we had developed this blocked program, block 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, when I entered a new school's program, when I left Arizona State and I had this whole plan pretty laid out and went to Louisville, I was like, okay, here's a new challenge. Now you got to implement this program to a new team, right? So how are you going to do it? It was very simple. Anybody who was freshman, they did the block 1 programming, and then the entire rest of the upperclassmen did block 2 for the entire winter program, because that program was still based off of some of the basic strength components I believed in, and I was going to figure out how well, and luckily for me, I replaced a coach that I had a high regard for. They were very technically sound. There was just a few minute things we had to change from a program structure size. So that actually helped me. But if I were going to a college, all the freshmen who were there would be block 1. The entire upperclassmen for 8 weeks would be block 2, because it'd be easier to coach and evaluate. And then I could splinter them off into all my different programs by the time that we got to summer. Okay, this is a question for Coach Dorsey, organizing the tier system for track and field. So track and field, there's 2 things I learned. One, I actually just learned this summer when dealing with track and field athletes, and it happened to be with my son. As most people know, the tier system is based off a 3-day-a-week whole body programming. Back when I first started it, it was a long process of evaluating everything that I knew and things that I believed in, and developing a plan that I thought did not mimic the structures of a typical powerlifting and or weightlifting program, as well as some of the mixed match hybrid programming that was out there. I was very fortunate to come up in an era where coaches were willing to share and had millions of summer programs to study. And with the fact that I came out of college under a high intensity based strength program and a strength coach, I had a very diverse upbringing, so to speak, as a young strength and conditioning coach to choose from. And that's something I would also recommend. Don't get stuck on the one way you learn. Learn everybody's different programming. You never know what you'll find. And that's how ours was actually created. But with track and field, what I found was a couple of things in rotations. It was a 3-day-a-week program, but I always knew we had to train the throwers more, but I never could figure out Monday through Friday how to develop a 4-day tiered program that wouldn't wear these guys out. So we'd always just go 3 days of heavy tiered work and then 1 day of a lot of accessory work, a lot of extra back and lat and accessory type of movements, posterior shoulder, core. It wasn't until I really resonated to watching high-level athletes train and the throws, and then watching my son and the commitment that throwers generally have to the weight room. If any athlete really has a transferable trait of success from getting stronger and powerful in the weight room to their sport, it's a thrower. I mean, it's amazing how it's just a great thing, right? Get strong, throw further. It doesn't resonate sometimes like that on the other sports, but in the throwing, it does. And with my son training, I finally decided that, okay, these throwers are different cats anyway. They're generally always the strongest guys in your weight room and your strongest women in your weight room because of the way they train. They have very little aerobic component, so they're never out there doing the crazy conditioning that we like to do with all the other sports. Everything is highly, very, very explosive and very, very short bursts. So their recovery generally is very, very quick also. So I finally was like, okay, these guys, this would be the group that you could bring in 4 days a week and bring them in on a Saturday. Because that's how throwers, I really believe. I've been around some I coached high-level throwers at Boise State. I watched high-level throwers that were some of the strongest cats I'd ever seen when I was at Arizona State. Though, if you set up the plan and you explain them the plan, them throwers will come in on Saturday. I believe that in my heart. So what I finally figured out after 30 years was how to design a 4-day-a-week tiered program for throwers. So it looks very similar to what I would tell you how I would recommend doing a tiered program for track and field. The one thing about track and field outside of throwing, and again, I'm not a track and field coach, but you don't have to emphasize the upper body component as a tier 1 exercise. Like I know sprinters look very musculature, and I've heard some guys and some women have excellent body weight ratio bench presses, but it doesn't have to be a tiered 1 programmed exercise. It doesn't have to be a priority in the movement. So what I would recommend, and what we did, especially at Arizona State, and Ben Hilgert ran the program was I was there, and I think he's got 3 national titles, and Coach Kraft was the head coach at the time, and he loved the tier system. Every one of their coaches had our book. So we were very fortunate that here was a coach that believed in what we did, and whether we had a small part or not, Ben wound up with 3 national championships out of it. And what we did is we emphasized the session T, or the total body lifts, twice a week. So Monday and Fridays were tier 1 session, and then it was Wednesday was the session was big squat Wednesday. And then they used tier 2 upper would be on a Wednesday, would be their big upper body lift for that. So for the sprinters, that would be the day that they would do a barbell bench. And then depending on the events would depend on the movement choices. You know, most of the sprinters, they would clean and snatch. So they would clean on Mondays and snatch on Fridays, and then do all the accessory work that fall in behind. But most of the single leg squat work came on those days, and then the bilateral squat day fell on Wednesday, whether it be a front squat or a back squat, or at times during the year could have been a quarter squat based off of where we were as part of in season versus out of season. Now with the throwing program, what we did, or what I finally did, and it hit. I just took that same principles of a TLT, but then the throwers come back on Saturday and do U. So for the shot putters, that's their big bench day. For the hammer throwers, they don't need to bench at all, really. That's not a key component to them. So they may do some dumbbell work or some shoulder or some vertical pressing as their tier 1. I was unaware of that until working with my son and Judd Logan. And Judd, one of the strongest guys ever to throw, but he told us the story that when he was leaving college to go pro and met his coach that was going to take him to the Olympic Games, that the coach walked up to him. Judd was benching, I don't know, close to 5, and he puts his 2 fingers in between his chest and goes, "Too thick, no more benching." And Judd stopped benching and threw several meters further. So it's a different component. It's about length, and it's about lengthening the body in the hammer versus being very, very strong and explosive in the shot put. In the discus, from what I can gather, somewhere in between. But if you look at the body, now Krauser's a lot taller than most shot putters, but he's still pretty massive individual. But when you look at each different thrower, you can see the body type differentials. So you can tell where the different components come in. but that's how I figured out how to finally manipulate a 4-day-a-week tiered program into the model, because I looked at it like we all do. I looked at it during the weekdays. And I looked at it like, but we have sports that practice on Saturdays. When I was at Boise State, our track team lifted year-round, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, because Coach Jacoby was never not going to lift 3 times a week unless it was a major national meet. So we're a 7-day-a-week coach anyway, and if we can build that relationship, if we do work with the throwers, I know a lot of times in this era, the throw coach in particular specifically writes the throw programming, but in that case, if you're the lead strength coach and the throwers are such a unique group, I would bring them in on Saturdays. It really will help the dynamic of the work week. I don't necessarily, I've not been good enough, I haven't done enough experimentation with my son or talking to my son with his new coach of how the work week looks from a practice standpoint, but definitely out of season, that would be an ideal situation. You know, depending on what your head coach thinks about what the rotation for the 3-day-a-week athletes are, but the throwers, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday was a huge success. Now, that success is one athlete and one, right? So I need to get some more, but this is a fairly higher level collegiate thrower who's going into a 6-year super senior COVID year. So he has some experience under the bar. So I thought it was a pretty good experiment to do with him. And I feel very confident in recommending that plan to a team of throwers. And then the manipulation of the exercises is all based off of what event and how it would place throughout the year. And that's the great thing about the program design of anybody's design. Once your template's laid out, it's the creativity of what movements really help benefit athletes at different points in their career. So I hope that answered your question, Coach, but I still owe you the multi-sports, not the linear speed. That's probably my worst answer, Coach Martin, so I'm sorry about that, but I gave you good people to look out for. Okay, last question, and hopefully, and I think I've got a chat. Last question was, and I think I got this right, the question was, what are your thoughts about Olympic benches versus half racks? I'm going to guess that question means, what are my thoughts of having the traditional bench press stations versus half racks with the benches in them? Is that individual? That was Cindy. Are you on the line? Okay, well, I'm going to answer it anyway because she asked it. I would tell you it's very specific to what you believe and how you train and how many athletes you have in your facility or what your facility is designed like. I always thought you needed to have benches until we learned, especially with the way I trained, where we're going to do a squat, a pull, and a press every day. It was more conducive to do everything in one station. And then as I found out, as I got away from my competitiveness thoughts as a power lifter and Olympic lifter and realized, well, these guys or these women aren't competing anyway, so we can just roll a rack. We can just roll this bench into a rack and off we can go and have more stations. So I think the very simple answer is it's all based off of your philosophy, your modalities, what you feel is necessary in your gym, how much space you have. I won't sit here and lie to you. I do miss lifting out of a competitive Olympic bench. When I go to commercial gyms, it's like I've hit a birthday cake and got a new present because I'm so used to being in a rack with an adjustable bench, rolling in and out. And I don't think there's any one way's better than the other. I think it's all based off of facility design, what types of beliefs you have in training. Do you prefer to have a bench area, a squat area, or in a platform area versus everything in one conducive station? a lot of coaches have gone to that because of the amount of athletes they have in a room at a time, and it just helps keep a lot more order in a large group training atmosphere. So I would say, if you got them, great. If you've got half racks, same thing. Benching is benching. It all will be a personal opinion of how you believe your program should be designed and what your facility layout should be. So I got Mark's block 0. Okay, we got, what role do you think the addition of sports science specific positions in addition to strength staff will play in the future, such as the Blue Ray combo? How should a younger coach decide between these two paths? Man, I just talked to somebody about this today. Well, obviously, here's what I will tell you. Theirs works because Matt is a practitioner. It's hard to work when the scientist has limited practitioner capabilities. The gentleman, the coach that did our GPS work at the Panthers was a former player of mine, and he's learned through I'm not trying to promote anybody, but we use Stat Sports. So the Stat Sports guys would come in and tutor him up, and then he learned some of the specifics of what we were looking for and developed some own unique plans on himself. And I think what we have to be aware of is the sports science phenomenon came from overseas. And what happened in American sports is we hired all these sports scientists from overseas that had no experience with the American sports they were going to work for. And that kind of threw a lot of things off. And they always ask me, well, where'd you get your sports science guy from? I said, I got him from the American football fields because that's what we work with. So I think there's something to be said about your expertise within the sport. No one really knows. Matt Ray played college football. Matt was a kicker at UNLV with Mark Philippi. So Matt knows the game. And Matt and Dave had a unique relationship that goes back probably a little further than I, but really had a good partnership when they were both at IMG together. So they were doing things at IMG at that time and building a unique relationship that they knew they could coexist with each other. It's a lot of times too, sports science is here and strength coaches are there, and there's another two groups that like to battle heads a lot. And and I even said this when me and Matt first started. Matt would be like, you're 10 years ahead of the research. And I go, well, that's why I don't read the research, Matt. I mean, you're just telling me I'm 10 years ahead, but people don't think what we're doing is research. I'm a big believer in, some of the best research out there is not being published because there's no time to publish it, but the results speak for themselves. But Matt has done a good job of assessing that data and understanding how it works in a practical way. That is the key. The key to the success is the implementation of the science into the strength. It's not the strength into the science. We have to be willing to listen and understand the values of how it can affect what we're trying to accomplish. And that's what we said earlier. I don't know what time you jumped on, Joey, but we were talking about how some of the things Matt has found out now, and there's a difference between GPA data and what Matt and those guys are doing, which I call real live practical data that's going to help us benefit our athletes' performance. Where again, he's finding out that what we thought athletes had to squat 2 times or 2.5 times their body weight to run fast or whatever that used to be, he's finding out it's like 1.7 for guys over 250 and 1.9 for guys under 250. I think those were the 2 numbers he threw out the other day. The process is here's the tough part, and this is where I'll give Coach Saban a lot of credit, because that was a huge paradigm shift for a guy who had won that many national championships with under one specific way of training. Is he adapted, and I heard a podcast, or it was a taping of his radio show where he said, and this is like subjective versus objective comments. How many times have we all said before GPS, coach, we look worn out. We look worn out. And that coach is like, well, how do we know they're worn out, right? Well, now they've got data that supports that. And he even said it. Now, when I get this report and it says, Coach, it looks like the guys are worn out, I have statistical data that proves that, okay, now we have to back off. Now, there's sometimes you can see it and you can make a gut decision, but this is what we need. We need openness from the sport coaches. There's a lot of great things going out there in sports science today that aren't being utilized because the sport coach, well, we can't worry about that. And there's certain things that we still have to get under our thought processes too. Is you can't walk up to a coach in the middle of a game and say, hey, so-and-so's, Cam Newton's player load spiking. We might need to pull him out for 5 plays. I mean, that's the fine line, right? There's always going to be those types of discussions. And how are they brought? I think you have to look at it a lot. I think they're the big proponent. What I think Matt and Dave are doing is they're not just collecting data. They're evaluating and applying that data. There is a lot of coaches out there, and there's a lot of teams that are telling you their sports science, and really what they're doing is collecting data and not sitting down and evaluating that data because it's like we always say, it's like keeping up with the Joneses. Well, he's doing GPS, we got to do GPS. But what are you doing with the GPS? And that'll be the key, is how you as a sports scientist can build that relationship with the strength coach, that the information that you bring him has practical applications to the things that they're going to be required to do and the things that they're going to be asked to do on the field. And then both of you, being in a collaborative effort, going to the sport coach and explaining to him how this data and this specific numbers and the specific data tells you what we thought we knew with just our eyes. Now, you asked, how do you choose between one or another? That is going to be a question. We just had this conversation last night with a colleague where one of his former students went the sports science route, and now he feels like he's locked in and doesn't know if he can get back into strength and conditioning. That is something you have to be willing to accept. It's 2 different roles. If you have a strength and conditioning coach background, I think you have more merit to be an asset to a strength coach than if you don't. So I think that my recommendation would be is to be a strength coach, learn sports science, and if you believe that's the route you feel you have the best intentions, you morph that way than going right into sports science and trying to go into the strength and conditioning field. That's what I think would be the best recommendation for you, if that's what you're looking at. But right now, everybody, and I can see your face now, Joey, so I can kind of figure out your age bracket. Everybody in your age bracket should learn something about one of the unique aspects that are going on now with data analytics as it comes to the KPIs of performance as well as player load and recovery. And one thing I've learned as I've self-evaluated and learned some of the things this past year out of coaching, when it comes to the individual, a lot of times we get caught up with the player load and reducing volumes. Oh, the guy's overworked, we got to pull back the volume. But when it comes from an individual standpoint, I think we also have to look at it from the perspective of, is he under recovered? And what do I mean by that is, before we make a snap judgment, what occurred the day before that put him in this modality? Like what I've told a lot of people is, in the NFL model, Tuesday is the designated off day for the majority of the athletes and teams across the league. But for Tuesday, for some of our veterans, that's the hardest day of the week for them, because they're asked to do daddy duty, which generally means pick up and take the kids to school, they're probably going to be asked, depending on the age, to read or do something involved in the school. Then they're going to go meet with some marketing people, and then they're going to go meet with their foundation people. And then they come back to Monday and go, oh, Joey, okay, I see what you're saying, Steve. Oh, I know who Joey is now. I couldn't remind. Look, you all cleaned up, Joey. But you see what I'm saying? So you got to look at, so then it becomes very specific, and that would be your job as the sports scientist, is to bring that up. Hey, so-and-so was really off compared to other weekly anomalies coming off of the Wednesday practice. And then you go say, hey, what happened, Joey? Man, house. Man, I had a marketing meeting, and then I had a big dinner for my foundation last night. I didn't go to bed till 3 a.m. Whoop, 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 whoop. Or, you know, you have a vet who just had a child, and he had to get up all night because his wife was sick. So those are things that we got to remember from the individual basis. I really believe it's not necessarily, oh my God, he spiked, we got to adjust his loads the next day. It's, well, let's just see, maybe he was under recovered, and we just got to get the guy to make sure that he gets back into his normal routine. Well, that's it for me. I believe we've gone about 90 minutes. We had tabled it. If there anybody that has any questions or comments moving forward, I think we can unmute you. Is that true? Where's James? James, can we unmute people?
I think we can unmute. I just tried, and you guys can hear me, right?
Oh yeah, you just unmute. So if you got any questions or comments, again, we appreciate it, and we're going to try. We're not trying, but the goal is to do this every month. Try to bring a little bit of different flavor to it. We want to pay back. Me personally, selfishly, I love paying it forward, because guys like Yox paid it forward for me, and he's one of the guys that have put me in the position that I am in today. So it's only right that I continue to give back, so that I represent the people who have done that for me. Also, Dynamic is 100% of the coaches, regardless of who you are. We're trying to do the best we can to not only expose you to us, but to give you quality information outside of what the typical equipment brands are doing. We want you to know we're coaches for the coaches, and that we want to do whatever we can to help you not only build a terrific program, but hopefully one day build you a terrific weight room also. We've got highly quality people who are very committed to that process. Our owners are 100% supportive. The team that they have built in the last year, on top of the exceptional people that they've already had in the building, is quite impressive. I think you can see by some of the people that we've hired in the last year that we are making a true commitment to benefit coaches throughout the United States in any way we can, from an education standpoint, from an equipment standpoint, and just being as supportive as we can, and to be an asset to all of you. Again, we're on the 60-second strength coach. That's kind of my baby. I love it. We'll be looking for guest writers here soon. We're on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're going to start launching some new products, as well as some cool little, giveaways or whatever they call that stuff on Instagram. And we'd love to get some equipment in your hands, and if you win the prizes. So with that being said, if we've got nothing to say, for myself, Dynamic, Tammy, and Kurt, and then the guys who are on the team that are on tonight, I appreciate you guys taking the time out. And again, we're here. Reach out to any of us. Oh, wait, I got a direct message. Coach Ken, could you provide me with your contact information? I have a few questions asked. Yeah, you can reach me. I've got 20 emails. Reach me at Joe, is our emails period, right? Joe period Ken at mydynamicfitness.com. That would be the best one for you to reach me at. And I'm very good at answering coaches' emails if they reach me direct. I'm not always 100%. I get lost in my numerous email addresses, but I am very good at trying to do that, because I know it's important, and I know people want to hear what they want to be answered, what they've asked. So with that being said, thanks again. We look forward to it. And for all of you that came on, especially the people that I see their names that I was very, very excited to see that you'd be willing to spend this time with us. I can't thank all of you enough. So again, till next time, we'll build a better athlete here at Dynamic Fitness and Strength, and we'll see you guys next month. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.